You're probably watching this video because you want to pass the PE exam. Well, did you know that one of the biggest challenges of passing the exam will be overcoming stress and anxiety? Most engineers that take the exam, they have a full-time job, they have a family, they have job responsibilities that are just overarching in their careers right now. Well, in today's episode, I have with me Matthew Shakirian. Matthew is a licensed professional engineer who was displaced from his home country of Iran. He ended up living in a tent in Turkey for a whole winter. Then he came to the US with no education and no money. And he built himself up to get his engineering degree and ultimately to pass the PE exam. In this episode, he's going to share with us some of the strategies that he used to overcome the stress and anxiety that goes into the PE exam prep process, including utilizing a psychologist to help him implement strategies. This is an episode that you're not going to want to miss. So let's jump right into pass the PE exam. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Matthew Shakirian is a licensed professional engineer. He's also a project engineer at Elevation Land Solutions, and he passed his PE exam, so we're happy to talk to him today. Matthew, welcome to Pass the PE exam.
Hello, Anthony. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to see you and talk to you.
I'm excited to have you. So start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your career journey, kind of what inspired you to get into civil engineering, and how'd you end up where you are?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Anthony. I was born and raised in Iran in a religious minority community that my community was banned from attending any universities. So as soon as I figured out I cannot pursue my dreams and acquire any job in Iran, I decided to escape from Iran. And I went to Turkey, and I didn't know any Turkish word before I go to Turkey. So I lived there for a while, and 6 months later, an earthquake happened, which damaged pretty much the whole city and also ruined my rental property. So after that, I ended up in a tent in a very cold winter of Turkey, which was very fun. And then after 6 months after that, I was, during the year that I was living in Turkey, I was going through the process of my immigration to the United States. And I came finally into the United States in 2012 with $300 in my pocket. And eventually I was somewhere that I could go to universities. The only question was how I'm going to figure out the way to finance it. And I ended up getting jobs working 2 shifts, sometimes 1 shift, but between 50 to 70 hours. And I kept studying as a part-time student until 2021. I was graduated from University of Houston. And a little bit before that, I acquired my first engineering job, which was for a subcontracting company doing a lot of bypass pumping design and construction dewatering design. And after my graduation, I went to a land development, worked there for a while. And after that, another company which was doing more like public works. And about almost a year ago, I decided to go back to residential development, but doing hydrology and hydraulics modeling. So that was my journey, and until I came to Elevation Land Solutions.
Wow, it's an amazing journey. Matthew, your journey from Iran to the U.S. is really remarkable. Tell us more about that and how the challenges that you faced while transitioning from Iran to the U.S. kind of influenced your approach to earning your PE license.
Yeah, I appreciate that question as well. Actually, whenever I look back to my life and stuff happened, the earthquake, I kind of like, although it was very tragic and unfortunately a lot of people lost their lives. However, for me, it was an awakening moment that how much our life depends on infrastructures. And we are living in our houses, and we always go and open the faucet and we expect to get water or all infrastructure or electricity or everything works. But a moment like earthquake and not having all of these, it was the moment that showed me how much infrastructure is important. And thinking about that probably was my most motivative factor to study civil engineering and focus on infrastructure and try to go that way and serve community in that way.
So at some point in your career journey, you decided that you wanted to pursue the professional engineering license.
Right.
Now, studying for a PE exam while you're working a full time job is a real challenge that I think all engineers face, probably all of our subscribers face. How were you able to structure kind of your study plan to balance work, life, and the exam prep all effectively?
Yeah, actually, when you get graduated and you go working for companies, there are a lot of different things that you also need to focus and study. When you acquire a design engineering job, there are a lot of different jurisdictional catalogs or different specs that you need to study to be able to do your job. So it's gonna be very tough to, on top of that, to prepare yourself for a P engineering. However, what it takes is a lot of discipline. In my case, if I tell my story, how I studied for P while I was working full time, was I knew for passing P, I need at least 250 hours to 300 hours of study to be prepared for the exam. And that was a slum of time that I couldn't have access to in a week or in a month, considering working. So what I did, I was studying for 8 months straight every night for 1 hour. And it didn't matter if I was sick or if I was had something to go to attend, like engineering community meetings or etc. I had that plan in my schedule that every day that I come back from home, from work to home, I need to study 1 hour, at least 1 hour. And over weekend, I could study 5 to 6 hours. So that was my plan about how I prepare myself for P exam.
I think that's great. And I think this is a really important point because what Matthew did was great. He kind of figured out about how many hours he was going to need to study and then kind of worked backwards and figured that he would need 8 months with a full time job to be able to study for like 300 hours. So, because I get the question all the time from people, how long is it going to take me to study? So it depends, number one, on how many hours you think you're going to need for the exam and then how you can fit that into your schedule. And so you have to factor those things in. I always tell people you should probably figure it's going to take you 6 to 9 months to prepare with a full-time job, just to be safe. But I think Matthew's kind of example, his day-to-day example, is a good one where you may want to study for an hour a night after work. I used to do it in the morning before work because that was, for me, that worked better. And then maybe on the weekend you can get a couple of hours in. And then when you get closer to the exam, you might need some long hours on the weekend to do sample practice exams, right? Like in the 8 hours in the testing atmosphere. So it's really about thinking about what works for you. Now, Matthew, test anxiety can be a major hurdle for a lot of PE exam candidates. What techniques or strategies did you use to kind of stay calm and stay focused during the exam?
Yeah, actually, quickly going back to your point, knowing yourself is very important factor. You should know what motivates you, what prevents you from performing, and all of those comes to a picture. And even talking about an anxiety, for me, I need kind of like the way I was growing up and the way that I was always back in Iran, I was banned from any other rights that other people had. Kind of like grown a fighter mentality in me, if it makes sense. That not in a negative sense, in the meaning that no matter what happens, if I want to do something, I need to go. At the end of the day, I cannot blame anybody else unless myself. So I need to put up all the efforts myself to be able to perform. And that was an important factor because if you don't know yourself, you don't know what make you anxious or what gives you stress. And that's very important factor. About me, after finishing a school, and since I didn't have access to a school back in Iran, and I was a little bit struggling to transition from being a student to be a professional, and I couldn't find any other fight to motivate me every day. So I was working with a psychologist for a while, and 3 months before exam, I mentioned to her that I feel like an anxiety will be the most important factor that may prevent me from performing on PE exam. And then we designed some practices together that helped me to be calm on the exam. And when I went to the exam, fortunately, all worked and I was so calm. And all of those things that I was thinking come to make me anxious, none of them actually happened. And that's another thing. Probably 99% of the things that makes us anxious never happens. It's just kind of like how you're going to plan to be prepared in case if those happens.
Well, I mean, first of all, I will say that I'm sure that living in a tent in Turkey gave you that survivor mentality for sure, which I think can be beneficial throughout life, throughout your career, and certainly throughout an 8-hour exam process. But let's go back to the part about the psychologist. That's really interesting. You're the first guest on Pass the PE exam that has, used a psychologist in helping to prepare for the exam that I talked to, which is great. Are you able to share maybe some of those strategies? Like, was it breathing techniques? What were some of the things that they helped you to do?
Yeah, it was a lot of breathing technique, and also it was meditation. Uh, she was recording me some meditation practices and how to breathe and send me, and I was practicing those every night after studying for 1 hour. I was doing those practices for 30 minutes every night before I go to bed and prepare myself for tomorrow work. Yeah, but a lot of them was how to breathe, how to keep all senses together and focus and manage your all your senses to focus on just one topic. So when you pay attention to that topic, your hearing ability is working with your vision, with your other senses, how to focus, laser focus on one subject that keeps you calm at that moment.
That's awesome. And I totally agree with you. I think that can make or break your exam grade because it goes back to what Matthew said earlier. You do need to know yourself and know what some of your strengths are and some of your challenges are, because you could be the best engineer in the world. You could know every equation inside and out. But if you get nervous in the test like atmosphere when you're timed, right? And there's a time and it's hot or cold in the room and you're trying to beat the clock, like a lot of things are going on. So I think half the battle or more is really just remaining calm so that you can lean on your technical skills to do what you need to do. So, Matthew, there are so many resources out there today. There's books, there's prep courses. What were some of the resources or materials that you incorporated into your study strategy?
Yeah, actually, it's going back again to knowing yourself. My learning ability is when I see something visually. So for me, watching a lot of videos with different training providers was the key rather than reading the book. Probably 10, 15 years ago, I could focus and reading books all day. However, I figure out as I grow up and in my career and I get more responsibilities, sometimes probably my concentration span is shortening, and I need to find out other techniques that help me to learn and stay learning, because passing PE exam is just the only thing it tells about you is you are capable enough of logical thinking. However, how you prepare yourself for that exam tells a lot about you. Have you kept your discipline when you were preparing yourself for that exam? And for engineers, especially civil engineers, this is the exam. This is the most important exam that everything else that you did in your life to make you a professional engineer. Right now, this is the only thing between being a professional engineer and achieving your dreams. So this is the most important exam for you. And you need to also consider, I don't know, have you ever heard the 6P rules?
No.
Actually, it's very simple mantra that I always try to remember and remind myself about, that prior proper practice prevents poor performances.
Prior proper practice prevents poor performances.
Correct. And that's another aspect of preparing yourself for exams or for any other thing, for projects, for planning for the projects, for success of a company. Everything is just kind of like, you can summarize it with this mantra. And that pretty much was one of my most motivation to prepare myself for this exam as well.
That's great. That's awesome. And I think that is having a mantra, having some good habits is really important in terms of this exam. So along the same lines, what are some of the time management strategies that you use during your PE exam to kind of stay on track and ensure you completed the questions in the actual exam?
Yeah, it's kind of like testing techniques, really. And it is very important to understand the question right. And that was something else that with English being my second language, I needed to focus more a little bit on the reading the question right in the first try. And for other folks that English is their second language, I would recommend that try to be laser focused when you're reading the question. And even before you start trying to solve the problem, just look at the answers. Some of the answers might be in different units, may not make sense at all. Try to remove those answers even before you start your calculations. And if you don't know any question, the system allows you to flag that question. And then when later on, just keep going forward, try to answer all the question. But at the end, when you have extra time, you can come back to those questions that you flagged, and you can solve them hopefully better, or you from another question. And I think that's what happened to me on the exam. I flagged one of the question, but like 10 questions later, I learned something from that question that was helping me to solve the question that I flagged. So just try to keep that mentality that everything happens around you is for a reason to teach you something. So if you are kind of like a person that absorb everything happens and try to learn from it, it helps you in long run.
Yeah, I think that that's probably one of the best pieces of advice about this exam is if you don't know the question, try it, but then move on, because you need to get all of the ones right first that you know 100%, and then you can come back and spend some time on the next round of ones that you don't know as well. And to Matthew's point, you may end up figuring something out on a problem you skipped because of another problem that made you remember something. So just don't get stuck up and waste time on it. It's important. And there's actually a pretty good Zen proverb that says everything that happens to you is the best possible thing that can happen to you, right? And that's along the same lines as what Matthew's saying is, listen, you might get one problem wrong, but you might learn something from it to get 3 other problems right. So, it's kind of like this process that you're going through. So, Matthew, what is one last piece of advice that you can give to engineers that are preparing for the PE exam right now?
I would say know yourself is the most important thing. And that's always is not just for your PE exam. Also, it helps you through your career, how you go forward. And also, passing PE exam doesn't mean that learning came to an end. It's just kind of like a borderline between you learning as a student versus you learning as a professional. And always keep in mind that you can learn from everybody. Just right now at the company that I'm working, Elevation Land Solutions, sometimes I'm learning from EITs because they are more tech savvy than me. And I kind of like belong to previous generations a little.
Right. My generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And these kids, they are geniuses when it comes to tech. And I try to learn from them. There is nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that if you are a PE engineer, you know everything in the world related to engineering. Sometimes, you may know the concepts, but the new techniques are always coming around, and we try to optimize those techniques as we go forward and progress. So that's something else that we need to keep in mind, that it doesn't matter how top level in our career we are, still there are a lot of things that we can learn.
Yeah, it's great advice. And before we let Matthew go, I just want to reinforce, I think the one piece of advice that he gave that it was really great also was, he worked with a psychologist ahead of time to get some strategies for calming the nerves and kind of, dealing with anxiety. I think you should definitely enlist the help of someone, whether it's a psychologist, a therapist, a mentor, someone that took the exam in the past. I mean, you need to be talking to other people through this process because, like Matthew said, everyone has their own strengths and their own weaknesses. You need to know what those are, and then you need to get help to help you get through this exam, because it's not just about necessarily knowing the content. It's about dealing with everything that comes along with sitting for an 8-hour exam. It's prepping while you have a family, while you have a job. It's sitting there for 8 hours straight and being able to go through the questions, even if you know the knowledge. So you have to tackle everything. And I think a lot of the strategies and some of the tips that Matthew shared with us today can really help you with that. So Matthew, once again, I want to thank you so much. Matthew Shakirian, he's a licensed PE. He's a project engineer at Elevation Land Solutions. He's had a very interesting journey in his life and his career. And Matthew, we're really happy that you joined us and shared it on Pass the PE exam.
I appreciate it, Anthony. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Matthew. It was super inspiring. To be displaced like that, to come to a new country without language, money, job, to build himself up, and then to pass the PE exam, and really love some of his strategies, like working with a psychologist that I've interviewed 100 people on this or more. No one's ever mentioned that. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, I would encourage you to put comments or questions in the video below that we can read and then answer for you in upcoming episodes of Pass the PE exam. Videos will publish weekly, so be sure to subscribe to our channel here so you don't miss some advice that could make a substantial difference, not only in your exam result, but in your career as a whole. I'll see you next week on Pass the PE Exam.